there should be questions asked that if somebody is being paid to do such a high-profile job and they are publicly stating they're doing all this amazing work and yet statistically they're failing, then should that person really be in charge of these decisions? Because many politicians, many police and crime commissioners, many people around the UK will stand and say to the press, I'm working incredibly hard and we're doing this and we're doing that. But then statistically, we've never lost so many young people to knife crime. So I think it's really, quite distasteful for them to have that approach, because obviously it isn't working.
First tonight, though, tributes have been paid to a 15-year-old girl who was stabbed to death on her way to school in South London today, with the teenager being described as very comedic with a bright future. The girl died after being stabbed in the neck with a long knife during the Wednesday morning rush hour in Croydon, according to witnesses. A 17-year-old boy who knew the victim has been arrested over the attack, which took place in Wellesley Road just after 8 o'clock. Now, the incident marks the 15th teenage homicide this year, with Anthony King, the chairman of My Ends, which is a project helping to stop youth violence in Croydon, claiming the organisation had been working with the alleged attacker for years. He's also described the stabbing as a major shock. Well, Alison Cope, who's an anti-knife crime campaigner whose son Joshua Ribera was killed in 2013, joins us now. Alison, thanks for taking the time to speak to us tonight.
That's okay. Thanks for having me.
Now this is the 15th teenage homicide this year. There were 14 last year. Are things getting worse in our cities, or is it specifically teenage death numbers that are getting worse?
I think the mindset of young people seems to have deteriorated, but I think, it's not teenagers that are allowing a lot of the negativity online, the films, the media that is influencing so many people. So that's not teenagers' fault, but, a lot of the content that they're watching is having a deep impact on some of these young people, and the mindset that some young people have is very hard to understand. To actually travel out of your home, early morning with, a murder weapon on you. What makes somebody do that? What can we do to stop them doing that? And to hear that work was done with the perpetrator, I'm not criticising anyone, but was that work effective? Did anyone see what kind of, work was being done, and what else could we have done, really? And this is the problem. We need to be doing so much more around every area for every single young person in this country, and that's a huge task. But aren't our children worth that?
According to Met Police figures, Croydon had more stabbings than any other borough in London. 211 knife crime with injury offences reported in the last year. But there are pockets, aren't there, of London and our cities across the UK that see these spikes. How much do you think that gang culture is getting into younger age groups than it was, say, 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, it is. The thing with a lot of the situations, though, it's not always gangs. And I think, when we mention gangs, it does actually prevent a lot of people from having a conversation around knife crime, because they'll look at their own families, their own children, and think, well, we don't live in London and they're not gang members. And then we're finding young people, Liverpool, prime example, Huddersfield, young people murdered at such very young ages that had nothing to do with gangs. I don't think this was anything to do with gangs as far as I'm aware, and I know it's early days, but it's the mindset of young people to feel that they need to take out a weapon. What what have we done to young people for them to be that scared of others that they feel that it's acceptable to take a machete, a zombie knife or a kitchen knife out with them travelling on public transport? And that's what we need to start looking at. Yeah, gangs, drugs, violence has historically always been there. But what we're seeing now is, that has spilled out into areas that you don't necessarily think of as high risk to young people who haven't got previous convictions, who aren't gang affiliated. So it is changing, and I think it can be quite dangerous just to label everyone gang members or drug dealers that get involved in knife crime, because that actually has a negative impact on some of the work that's people are trying to put across.
Alison, you mentioned the weapons there that people are carrying.
Yeah.
What about the intervention then in schools?
Yeah.
Do you think that there has been more evidence of schools stepping in and educating younger people on the dangers of carrying a knife?
Yeah, I think schools are trying incredibly hard to educate their students around this subject. The problem is, if you've got, for example, 200 million views on, the number one streamed movie, music video that's promoting such negativity, and then you've got one teacher, one police officer, one youth worker saying that's not acceptable, that's incredibly confusing for a young person to understand. Well, surely it must be okay to talk in this way. It must be okay to carry a weapon. Otherwise, how are mainstream channels allowing it to be promoted on their platform? So I think the problem that schools have is they're incredibly busy educating students on maths, English, for the GCSEs, for the exams. They just need more support. People like myself, the organisations in Croydon and across the whole of the UK just need to be supported and to enable every young person to receive the education that's needed. If you've got 100 schools in one area, but you're only able to educate 20 of those schools, that's 80 schools that potentially could have the next murderer going to them, which is why we must have a consistent approach.
Yeah. So much criticism of politicians when it comes to knife crime and what more needs to be done with the law specifically, and how police act to cut down and search potential people who would be carrying knives. In this case, criticism of the London mayor. He says he's working day and night to end the scourge of knife crime in London. Knife crime has been rising in the last 3 years. Should he be backing police to be more proactive, do you think?
I think there should be questions asked that if somebody is being paid to do such a high-profile job and they are publicly stating they're doing all this amazing work and yet statistically they're failing, then should that person really be in charge of these decisions? Because many politicians, many police and crime commissioners, many people around the UK will stand and say to the press, I'm working incredibly hard and we're doing this and we're doing that. But then statistically, we've never lost so many young people to knife crime. So I think it's really, quite distasteful for them to have that approach, because obviously it isn't working. So are we really going to keep paying these people so much money that are failing our young people? So that's one argument. Of course, more police on the ground obviously has a positive impact and shows a reduction. When Birmingham, for example, had the Commonwealth Games with police forces coming in from every area, it was the most peaceful, positive and amazing event that our city in Birmingham has probably seen in a very long time. People felt safe. We had all communities walking side by side, celebrating sport, celebrating life. You didn't see any fatalities because we had a very strong message given. We will not tolerate any behaviour. And they managed to fund that. They managed to bring the police in for that. All eyes on the Commonwealth Games. But surely a 15-year-old being murdered, an 11-year-old, a 13-year-old, to me personally feels far more important than, 100 metres track race. But the priorities seem to be wrong in this country. And
Alison, on that priority, then, do you think that sentences need to be tougher to discourage more people from committing knife crime in the first place?
If I'm really honest, I don't think that will make a difference, because we have tough sentencing, life sentence for murder. We have, but we're not consistent with our sentencing. You can go to one court in the country and a young person gets sent to prison, first time offence, but you'll also go to another court and they might get probation. And it's given an incredibly mixed message. I think if there was a strong, consistent consequence to carrying a knife, then we would start to see a consistent reduction. So I think
tighter guidelines for judges then?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Support for judges and an alternative. If so, we know it's damaging to send a young person to prison. It's not actually, rehabilitating them. So what's the alternative? We should be having a really intensive community order that, tag in restrictions that really makes a young person think, not just a 3 months, go to probation once a week if there is enough probation officers, and expect that to really change the mindset. Some young people think, I've got away with it.
Yeah.
So if we have more police, we have more probation, we have consistency and strong messages and more police, more support for young people that are making the wrong choices, we will start to have less of these headlines.
Yeah. Alison, thanks so much for your time. Alison Cope, the anti-knife campaigner whose son Joshua Ribeiro was killed in 2013. If you are just coming to this tonight, a 15-year-old girl who was stabbed to death on her way to school in South London has been described as comedic with a bright future. A 17-year-old boy who knew the victim has been arrested over the attack.